What's your reaction to what happened?
Yeah, Marcellus, I mean, I got mixed emotions. First is raw feelings about everything that has taken place and has transpired. Obviously, the tragedy of what took place to lead to the reasoning behind having these protests. But I was encouraged. I was encouraged at the unity. I was encouraged at how much buy-in there was, the response. I mean, there were protests taking place worldwide surrounding this whole topic of Black Lives Mattering and just having social justice. So I was encouraged by that, Marcellus. But I also got to say, you mentioned the looting and the chaos that took place. I understand violence takes place sometimes when change is taking place because it's uncomfortable. But there's a difference between clashing with peaceful protesters and something breaks out versus people breaking into sneaker shops and food shops and stores, grocery stores, different things like that. I just felt like it became a narrative that created confusion. And a lot of times what we do understand is when you're fighting for something that's socially justice involved, people are always looking for justification to say why it didn't work or why it shouldn't have happened. I was just disappointed that you have people that did not keep the main topic of conversation and the main focus of what these protests were for in the forefront.
Yeah, LaVar, I agree with you. Like, it was disappointing to see that aspect of it, the looting, the stealing, the violence that broke out. But I'm going to kind of focus on what I thought was positive about the weekend. And I felt like watching young people, the young athletic world, the young athletes, the generation that we have poked and prodded for years to have our athletes be involved and be activists and take advantage of their platforms. Well, we saw that happen. And the thing that was really beautiful about it, it wasn't just Black people talking. We saw all kinds of people speaking up and taking a part. And I think the big tipping point and where we're beginning to see change, we saw young and bold athletes from Southern schools, Joe Burrow, Trevor Lawrence, coming from LSU and Clemson, respectively, speaking out before their coaches even spoke out. To me, that is when the change begins to happen, when people on the outside, people that aren't directly involved, that don't necessarily feel the pains of the community, come out and speak about it. That's when we're beginning to have the kind of change that we want to have. And those guys speaking out and others who have big platforms who don't necessarily look like us, when they take the mantle and they begin to point the light on some of the injustices that are happening across the country, that's when we will begin to make real progress. And I think it was a huge step forward this weekend.
Yeah, guys, I mean, such a bag of mixed emotions if you talk about what's happening in America again. And unfortunately, we've all heard this before. We've all seen this before. We've all felt this before. I'm really privileged to be on the show with you guys right now. A brother from the East Coast and Pennsylvania and Pittsburgh, and a brother from the South, North Carolina and Raleigh. All different experiences, but understanding what is keeping us feeling that same commonality of a broken promise of equality from America. And no matter if that broken promise comes in the complexion of racism or some people feel like an opportunity, you saw all types of people out there, Black, white, old, young, all coming with the collective spirit of pain, of anguish. It wasn't just a collective chant and protesters, but there was a collective pain that we all saw. And it's interesting to see the protesters sit there in a peaceful manner. And then we saw also the rioters and the looters who had more destruction on their mind than the purest of intentions. But this is the situation that has come to a head once again in this country as an ugly reminder that the playing field still isn't level as promised. And when will we get to that day? I tell everyone all the time, growing up, for me, my father used to tell me how evil always came in disguise. And it could come in a different color, shape, form, uniform, but it's always evil. And if you understand what that means in terms of how it affects your life, we're starting to realize that we're dealing with a dynamic that is before us and unfortunately is still with us. And we need to make some changes. So, LaVar, as you see all of these things happening right now, talk about those deeper emotions that you felt in your experiences.
Well, yeah, I mean, when you talk about the complexities of racial relations and how that works, it's always going to be a complex conversation because one side understands it from the experience of it. And while the narrative and the conversation with other people is you have to help them to understand what they don't get and what they don't understand. I agree with Bucky on the quotes and the speaking out from Lawrence and from Burrow. I finally feel as though the message is starting to become much clearer. I'm finally starting to feel as though the understanding of what this anger and what this pain and what the frustration that you see playing out so many times is really representation of. This is not a mythical feeling. It's not a hidden, feeling of insecurity or lack of relevance. It's a reality that we face every single day. And so for me, the one thing that I felt coming out of yesterday and the protests as of late, and maybe it's because of the amount of exposure that can come from different platforms and the voices can be heard and not be muffled or manipulated to sound differently. I think that we are going to, for the first time in all of these historical moments of time of frustration and anger and outrage, I really am hopeful and I truly believe that we are going to have a much better dialogue as to how we move forward. And a lot of it, I believe, will be led by athletes. And it's a time for athletes to really stand up and impose their will and their influence on platforms that are so amazingly set up to make a difference in these moments.
Yeah, LaVar, I completely agree with you. I think what we're seeing is a different level of humanity being expressed. And I think, obviously, what has come out of the pandemic has really, everyone has been home. So everyone has been forced to kind of take a pause, and we've been able to consume more videos and see what is going on. Where in the last 2 or 3 months, we've seen a number of instances that have kind of shown up and popped up on our radar. And so now you're seeing these athletes like J.J. Watt and Carson Wentz speak up to some of the things that they're seeing and begin to really understand and relate and empathize with some of the issues that blacks have been talking about inside and outside of the locker room. And so, look, sometimes you have to take a step or two back before you can make progress and go forward. And I think this weekend showed us that more people are willing to engage in the discussion. More people are willing to kind of pick up the ball and run with it and have the conversation and try and carry it over the line. And the more people that we get having open and honest dialogue and conversations, that's when we will begin to see some of the progress that we all want to see.
Exactly. I mean, let's just be real about this, guys, that despair's destination is destruction. You got to understand, when your reality every single day, you go through an existence where you feel distant and disconnected from the values of your society. You hear the message, but you don't feel the love. And you get to a place where you start to make that risk-reward conversation in terms of, what do I have to lose? And what a horrible place to be in terms of mentality. But there is a reality. I've been in that place before, man. It's crazy growing up. My grandmother used to tell us the stories of yesteryear. And my grandmother was in Watts, California. And after the Watts riots of 1965, moved our family to greener pastures for a better life. She moved our family from Watts to Compton, California. And my mother grew up in Compton, California, graduated from Compton High, had me at the age of 19, and had the same ambition, same aspiration, just to level that playing field, just desperate to live greater than her circumstances, moved our family from Compton to South Central Los Angeles. Fast forward to 1992. I'm sorry, it looks so eerily similar to 2020. We had to go through the riots of LA. Same despair, same issues, the same discouraging feeling where you hear those principles, but you want to feel those values and feel valuable. And that's where we are. We're in a situation where we're hearing a lot of conversation about this, but it needs to materialize into something that can actually make the people who feel like they have been left behind on the lowest rung, who feel desperate, that they're being served as well, especially in confrontations as we're talking directly with the police. A public servant to serve and to protect you, not to inflict harm or create anxiety. And that's a situation that we're in right now. And it's so unfortunate, guys, that it's the same song, but it's a different day. Hopefully, what happened over the course of this week will make it a different day going forward.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from the show. And be sure to check out more of the best clips from Speak For Yourself, or go watch a few segments from our other shows on FS1.